Hi, this is Robertson, and in this video you're going to learn about how to have clear sinuses all the time. And we're going to be covering what causes blocked sinuses, first of all, because there are multiple causes and depending on what's causing it, you need a different solution. And then we're going to go through different action steps you can take, actions that you can take immediately that will immediately make you feel better, and then more permanent actions which long term will make sure it's not something that you ever have to address or in fact even think about again. First, a quick disclaimer. You'll notice that I didn't say that I'm Dr. Elton Robinson, and so this is not medical advice. This is only for people who've been in the exact position I was in where they have issues with their sinuses, but you've been to a doctor and either they haven't helped or what they've given you is not been enough. Just before we get into it, I want to say that if you suffer with blocked sinuses, if you suffer with sinus infections, I really feel for you. It really sucks, right? Sinus infection can be extremely painful, but just having a blocked nose, it doesn't sound like such a big deal, but we all know that it is, right? If we actually suffer from it, because it's the feeling like you can't breathe, right? That's the thing that's really challenging, and then you've got to breathe through your mouth. It means you're going to be breathing in the mouth a lot of the time. It means you're definitely going to be breathing through your mouth while you're asleep. This is a really bad thing for reasons that we'll cover in more detail later, right? So, but I just want to say that I feel for you. I feel for how unpleasant it is. I feel for how unpleasant it is to constantly have mucus, to constantly feel like you can't breathe, to constantly have irritation up there. So those are the kind of things that we're going to address. And I'm not going to go for quick fixes. I'm going to go for things that really resolve it. Just before we get into this, I guess I should address the most commonly used things for blocked sinuses, things like pseudoephedrine, which they use in a lot of pharmaceutical medication. I don't want to say any specific brand names, but you probably know what I mean. So pseudoephedrine, ephedrine is a drug. It's actually quite a strong drug. It's a strong adrenal stimulant that is actually used to make crystal meth, right? Which is why in the US at least it's limited. You can only get it under specific conditions. And so the way that it works is basically by putting your body into a stress state to the degree that you start to breathe more clearly. And that does bring up a point before we get into this. I just want to let you know that when I say how to have clear sinuses, what I mean is so that you have no irritation, no frustration, no pain, no discomfort, and so you can breathe perfectly reasonably. What I don't mean is that it's going to be 100% clear all the time, because it's actually not meant to be. Your body actually regulates how much you're breathing by the amount of free passageway you have in your sinuses. And so the only time that your sinuses are supposed to be completely clear and completely free is during a crisis, during a time where your adrenal glands are kicking in, your fight or flight response is going, and you have to do something, right? Your body needs a lot of oxygen very quickly, and so it expands that ability to breathe. But this is not the way that you're actually meant to be all the time. So using a drug that has crystal meth-like qualities to temporarily put us into an adrenal state so we can breathe clearly for a few hours, I hope you understand, obviously isn't a sustainable long-term strategy. As always in these videos, we address the causes rather than just the symptoms so that we can come up with permanent solutions as well as quick things that work straight away. Now, the number one cause of a blocked nose is simply this. It's a lack of oxygen caused by overbreathing. So what does this mean? Well, there's a lot more details about this in the video below where we talked about how to oxygenate the cells and correct breathing. But I have to explain this a little bit because the technique that I'm going to give you to actually help to immediately resolve unclear sinuses involves understanding this. So I've got to lay this out for you here. So here's the thing. In order for your body to transport oxygen from your red blood cell into your actual cell, which is your the center of your cell, your mitochondria, which is what creates energy, or ATP. So in order for that process to happen, where from breathing it gets into your red blood cells, but to go from your red blood cells into the mitochondria of every cell, which is your energy producing factories, and produce enough ATP, you need enough carbon dioxide. And so the challenge that a lot of us have is that because of three factors, because of too much, especially chronic stress, because of overeating, and because of undermoving or lack of exercise, sedentary lifestyle, whatever you want to call it, we have less of a tolerance for carbon dioxide than we should have, and then we naturally would have had as a species when we were not overeating, when we were not barely moving, and when we were not chronically stressed, right? And so because of that lack of tolerance of carbon dioxide, we are in a habit of over-breathing. Because the mechanism to breathe, like if you were to hold your breath right now, what would you consider to be the mechanism that tells you that it's time to breathe again? If you were to just hold your breath, right? If you were to do it right now, right? What is it that tells you, oh, I need to take a breath in, or oh, I need to take a breath out? What is it that tells you you need to take a breath? Now, if you ask most people that, the answer that most people give you by far is that the mechanism is lack of oxygen, right? I'm lacking oxygen because I'm holding my breath in, duh. But that's actually not the case. The mechanism that tells you to breathe again, and that you need to breathe and that you can't keep holding your breath, is actually a buildup of carbon dioxide. That's how your body knows, or that's how your body thinks it knows, that that's too much and you need to breathe again. So that's the way it works. That's the impetus that tells you to breathe or to breathe more. And in more extreme examples, like if you're walking up the stairs or if you're exercising in some way, right? Your body tells you, because exercise builds up carbon dioxide, your body tells you to breathe more. And you might soon be huffing and puffing and panting and even wheezing, depending on where your exercise level are at, right? If you had to keep on exerting yourself to a certain degree. So the thing that tells you to breathe more is a feeling of too much carbon dioxide. But what happens if you have a feeling like you need to breathe more that is inflated, right? What if you were actually better off breathing less, but you have a feeling that you need to breathe more because you're overeating, because you're under-exercising, and because you're chronically stressed, which almost all of us in the modern world, deal with all three of those things, right? Well, in that case, what would happen as a defense mechanism if you kept over-breathing is that your body would try and reduce and block your sinuses so that you could breathe less. It's basically trying to force you to breathe less, okay? Now, the challenge of this is, before I get into the challenge, so why is it important to breathe through the nose? The reason it's important to breathe through the nose, there's a few things. First of all, the nose is a filter, right? It's gonna filter out around 90% of all pollutants and contaminants. So, the viruses, the bacteria, the allergens, all the stuff in the air which you don't really want in your body, your nose is going to filter most of it. Second of all, it's also where there's a higher concentration of nitric acid, which scientists don't fully understand exactly why there's such a high concentration at a certain point in the airways, as far as I know. But it's when you breathe through your nose, you keep increasing or maintaining that high level of nitric oxide, which is very important for heart health and overall bodily health. It's a whole other subject, right? But so that's another reason it's really important to breathe through the nose. Third reason is because the nose actually modulates the temperature of the air you're breathing in. If you're in a hot environment or a cold environment and you breathe that hot or cold air straight into your lungs without your nose filtering it, then that's not a good thing. It's damaging to the lungs, which again damages the health of your whole body. So this is an important issue, right? Breathing through your nose is really good. When you breathe through your mouth, it's really bad. First of all, mouth breather is an insult for a reason, right? It's not good when we see someone, slack-jawed, breathing through their mouth. Now I said it, hopefully you'll be aware of it, and you'll see other people do it. You do it yourself. You're like, oh God, I don't want to do that, right? But people do, and it's especially bad. People tend to do it all night while they're sleeping. Now that has all of the detriments that I just said, plus in order for your mouth to have a alkaline, correct pH environment, it needs saliva. And when you sleep with your mouth open, your mouth dries up. And the more that it dries up, the more it becomes acidic. And the more it becomes acidic, the more that you are likely to have infections, bacteria overgrowth, gum disease, teeth infection, all the rest of it, right? So it's seriously bad news to have such a blocked nose that you breathe through your mouth, and yet your body is doing it, is blocking your nose on purpose because you're over breathing. So that's like a root cause thing that you actually want to address. There's a lot more information about this in the video, which you can see a link to below this. And also we're going to get to a practical thing that you can immediately, because you may be like, oh, I'm suspicious of this, Owen, I'm skeptical. No problem. I'm going to give you a technique to try in this video, which will prove to you that when you actually breathe less, you'll immediately breathe better. And your sinuses will be better. But we'll get to that in a sec, because it's not the only cause. So the next cause is acute or chronic infection. And so acute means, well, if we look at it from an Eastern point of view, if the mucus that's coming out is yellow or has a more yellow, even orangey tinge to it, or green, that's an acute infection. If it's less the case, if it's more clear, then that's a chronic infection. But acute is not always such a bad thing, because it actually clears out some of the stuff which is stuck in there, even though it's unpleasant to have a sinus infection or to have a cold or whatever you're experiencing. The chronic infection is worse in a way, because it creates the situation of chronic inflammation and irritation, and that's what a lot of people struggle with. A lot of people, and these different factors go hand in hand, right? The overbreathing thing I just talked about very often makes that situation worse, as does the thing that we're about to talk about. So generally it's not like one of these causes, it's several things going on at once that have to be addressed. But when you understand and depending on what the cause is, different things will actually work to help it to some degree. So it's really important to understand all of these causes. Next thing is allergy or intolerances. And this is one that I have a tendency to keep, or have had a tendency to keep forgetting, which is why it's really important to remember all of these. So a few years ago, I think it was 4 years ago now, I had a situation where I kept having these chronic sinus issues, and I thought it was an infection. I thought I may be having some kind of Herxheimer reaction to some health techniques that I tried. I didn't really understand what was going on, and eventually I realized, oh, it was I was eating these crackers, and they had just a little bit of soy sauce that they were in. And the crackers are very light, and there was very little soy sauce. It's just like a little bit, but that's something that I'm allergic / intolerant to. So immediately, if I have soy, even the tiniest amounts, even just having a cracker dipped in a little bit of soy sauce, which doesn't have that much soy and it's not the worst kind of soy, that was enough to create really unpleasant sinus infection type symptoms. So that's what does it for me. Dairy is a common one, of course, that produces lots of mucus and irritates a lot of people's sinuses. That's more soy is a bit more unusual. That's more for me, but the number one thing for if I had to guess, law of averages, it's going to be dairy more than anything else that tends to create that issue. But whatever it is, that needs to be looked at. We'll talk about how to do that in a sec. And then lastly, and this is one that people rarely think of as well, but it's super important, is blocked intestines, right? And so, listen, reality is rarely simplistic. Reality is rarely one cause, one symptom, one solution, right? It tends to be a combination of different factors. So all of these are factors in how blocked and irritated your sinuses are, but this is a really important one as well. So why? Well, again, this is a subject that deserves a lot more explanation, and you can find a video below where we talk in detail about blocked intestines, because it really is a hugely important and huge subject. But again, just concise as I can be in a nutshell here, what happens is when we don't exercise enough, when we eat the wrong diet, when we overeat, all of this common stuff that everyone knows about, one of the impacts of that is that food and also gas starts to get built up more and more in our intestines, and our intestines start to get more and more blocked. This is much more true for the small intestine than the large intestine. And yes, this can be true for you even if you go to the toilet several times a day, although it's obviously less extreme if that's the case, and it's more extreme if you're constipated, if you only go once a day or even less than that. But blocked intestines are a key issue. Why? Because as the large intestine blocks, especially if that does, and the colon gets blocked, then the small intestine gets blocked. the small intestine gets blocked, then the liver is struggling, because the liver is like your main poison processing center in your body, right? It processes the poisons that you have taken in, but it also processes the poisons that your body just naturally creates, like metabolic waste, so as a result of doing what it does. And the thing about the liver is it doesn't just have a hole, like that'd be convenient, wouldn't it? Just like a hole at the side here to just boop, get rid of that. Kind of convenient, maybe not, to just get rid of that toxicity and poison once it's dealt with it and processed it. It doesn't have a hole, or it does have a hole. It's called the gallbladder, but that goes into the duodenum, and then from there it goes into the small intestine. It's got to pass through 30 feet, 150 corners of non-smooth, like bumpy material, and then it's got to go through several feet of large intestine as well, 6 feet of large intestine. So basically, if you've got blockages there, if it's hard for stuff to get through there, if you're constipated, then the liver starts to get backed up. Now also the lymphatic system starts to get backed up, and the lymphatic system, so this is like, the liver's like your poison processing center, right? Your toxin, more commonly called, right? Processing center. But your lymph is like your sewage system for your whole body. And where does the lymph have a hole? Well, again, not directly. The lymph dumps into the intestines. And so if the intestines are blocked, again, it doesn't have anywhere to go. Now, you know, lymph also can be excreted through the skin and other things. There's other things you can do, admittedly, with lymph, but still a big one is the intestine. So when the intestines are blocked, the lymph tends to be backed up. Now, why am I going into all of this? Because the degree that your lymph is backed up is the degree that your sinuses will tend to be blocked, right? And again, it's not the only factor, there's other things. And obviously they're connected. Like if you have an infection, acute or chronic, then that is going to create more waste that gets dumped into your lymph that then may get backed up if your intestines are blocked. And then when you have this situation as well, especially when the liver is blocked and unable to dump the waste that it needs to, then that's often where allergies and intolerances start to form to things that otherwise shouldn't really be harmful, like dairy, like soy, like whatever, right? So a lot of these things are interconnected in very interesting ways. And again, more information about that will be in the video underneath. But let's get to the practicalities. Let's go into, first of all, the immediate, and then the more permanent things you can do to help this. Okay, let's get practical. Let's get into the first technique. I will say, if you've just skipped ahead because you just want to know what to do, which I completely understand that tendency, what I'm about to say won't make sense unless you've watched me explain this one. So you've got to go back and listen to that, okay? All right, assuming that you've done that. So what's the technique I recommend? So it's interesting that you may well have noticed if you try and exert yourself when you have a blocked sinuses, it will unblock it to the degree it has to, but it's quite like unpleasant. It doesn't feel very good. Like for instance, you know, if you try and run uphill or lift heavy weights or something like that to force like some degree of air being able to go through your nose if you keep your mouth shut, it does work, but it really irritates them while it's happening. It's not the best way of doing it. A much better way of doing it is to increase your carbon dioxide just as much as running uphill or lifting heavy weights would, but doing it in an extremely relaxed way. And when you do that, what will happen is that the nose will clear very quickly. You'll be able to breathe much better without any kind of aggravation or irritation. So what's the technique? Here we go. So the first thing is to get yourself into a position where you are as relaxed as humanly possible. Now for me, that's lying down flat on a hard surface like a firm mattress, or even just a carpeted floor or a rug, whatever it be, and lying flat on my back and just, you know, relaxing every muscle in my body. Not everyone can be relaxed that way. So whatever it is for you, if it's sitting up, some people actually say it's better. If it's lying down on your side, whatever it is, it's okay, right? But get into whatever position helps you to relax your body the most, okay? So do that first. Then what you want to do is just start limiting how much you breathe in a very specific way. And so the way you want to do it is this. So let's say your normal breathing is like up, down, in, out, in, out. When I say up, down, I mean your diaphragm, up, down, up, down. So first of all with this, you want to make sure that you are breathing from your belly, right? So in, out, can see this from the side. So a breath in should have the belly go out, and a breath out should have the belly go in. You see that? And notice how my chest doesn't move when I do that. Now, the other way to breathe, the wrong way to breathe that you don't want to do during this or really ever, is like this with the chest, breathing in and out. That's what we don't want to do, okay? There's nothing wrong with sticking your chest out, but you definitely don't want to breathe that way. You want to breathe in with your belly and then out. So that's an exaggerated amount just to show you how to do that. But what you want to do is breathe from the belly like that, but breathe as little as possible. So you take, and what it is you take a little breath in, you like stop yourself from breathing in maybe as fully as you could, just breathe in a bit, and then you just relax. You just allow, so you let yourself breathe in a little bit, but not too much, and then you just relax, but with your nose, with your mouth closed, just let it slowly kind of sink back in, and then you'll feel like you're running out of air a bit, so you want to take a deep breath in, but you don't let yourself. You just take a bit of a shallow breath in, and again, just relax every part of your body, especially your lungs. So it's restricted breath in, allow yourself, and never force yourself to breathe in, right? That breath in should be like your body is desperate for the air, right? So it's a restricted, unforced breath in, where your body just brings it in, and then you just let it relax. Now, if you do this, you might well notice yourself feeling warmer. You might well notice yourself feeling lightheaded, relaxed, woozy, whatever. That's just your carbon dioxide increasing, which means that more oxygen can get to everything, which is fantastic. It's a good thing. Can you do it too much? Yes. If you hold your breath for longer than 3 minutes without training, that can be a negative thing. But just restricting your breath a little bit like this, totally safe, totally harmless, totally fine. Even though you may feel like, oh my God, I'm going to run out of breath, right? But let's give exercise as an example. Up until relatively recently, exercise wasn't a thing, right? I think it was the 1960s. It was like invented in California. People did sports and stuff like that, but just the idea of moving your body for the sake of health, that wasn't a thing. Now, just imagine those people who first set out to do that, like, you know, jogging or whatever it was, right? And imagine how like their feeling would have been like, oh, this is really unpleasant, right? Like when you first do something, when you first exercise, it's unpleasant, right? Why? You know, because of the lactic acid buildup, but also because the carbon dioxide buildup. Again, you feel like it's getting harder to breathe. You've got to breathe more, the exertion, right? And so this is a little bit like that. And this is why I said you've got to understand the theory first. And again, if it wasn't enough, then please check out the link underneath, watch the full video to really understand this topic, because you've got to, you know, in order for this technique to work, you've got to allow yourself to breathe in a restricted way and build up that air hunger, that feeling like I'm running out of air, but without panicking. This is why I said staying as relaxed as you possibly can, to relaxing every muscle in your body, and then especially relaxing your breathing, right? Like don't panic, don't like force anything, just allowing yourself to breathe in, but not too much, just restrict it a little bit and just let the lungs then just fall and relax. Allow yourself to breathe in, and then but not too much, and then let your lungs fall and relax. And so you're going to feel air hunger, but if you stick with it for a few minutes, doesn't take long, 2-3 minutes usually, you'll notice suddenly, you can breathe better, right? So that's a really effective technique. If you want to push it further, if it's only working a little bit, or if you're enjoying the feeling, you want to push it further, what you can then play with doing is just holding your breath briefly in between. So you do like a non-forced, restricted breath in, relax, just let the breath fall, and then just hold it out for a little while, for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, something like that, and then let yourself breathe in, but not too much, right? Now, if you hold it so long that you lose control, then that was too long, right? That's okay, just start again. But that's the way to do it, and that's like a little bit more advanced technique, and that's more as advanced as I want to show you in this kind of forum, without being able to have a little bit of interaction with you to make sure that you're doing it correctly. But that's simple, right? That's safe. You're not restricting it very much. You're just lying down. So, you know, even if you get lightheaded or whatever, you're not going to do yourself any harm. So make sure to do it lying down, sitting down, but somewhere where, you know, if you get lightheaded, it's no big deal, right? And it's a fantastically effective technique. Not only is it great for clearing your nose, it's also fantastic for numerous other reasons, which again, I'll explain more in the video that talks about correct breathing and oxygen and all the rest of it. But that is one of the best things you can do for your health. Okay, let's get on to the next technique. The next one I call clear and kill, but you want to do that carefully. So what do I mean? I mean, you want to clear your sinuses and kill whatever infection is in there. However, the carefully is super important. There's a lot of different things out there, and from my experience and from my perspective, most of them are just irritating. They don't really help, because anytime, like, you know, as with any, like, ideally you wouldn't be shoving anything up your nose, right? That's in an ideal world. Now, you may well be in this mess in the first place because you did, you know, like I know I did. I used to smoke for many, many years, both cigarettes and cannabis, and you know, I would always like breathe out through my nose, irritating and damaging my sinuses. Yes, I used to snort things as well. I was in a house fire once. So I've done lots of things to irritate my sinuses, and so, you know, and damage them, right? You may not have been as bad as me in terms of that, but still, the degree that you have irritated them, and it could be, you know, what else irritates them? Blowing your nose a lot, sticking stuff up there, sticking your fingers in there, sticking pens in there, whatever, right? I mean, you know, people do it, I know that they do it. Picking the nose. Any kind of activity that's irritating the sinuses is not really helping. And so I don't want to, you know, anything that's worked for you, fantastic. But, you know, different salt washes and neti pots and most herbal products and all the rest of it, I just find that they are, maybe they work short term, although for me they don't even work very well short term, but they just actually leave your sinuses more irritated later on. There's only one thing I've really found that is an exception to that, and I think the reason, and that's a product which I'll make sure I link to underneath, which is a really powerful herbal product. And I think the reason that it works and that it's worth doing, like any irritation that it does to the sinuses are much less than the good it's doing, is because it's so powerful that it really does actually kill the infections that are there. And I've heard numerous stories of people using this product who have these huge clear outs when they do, because it's actually clearing out this infectious material, and once it's gone, it stays gone, right? Or at least, you know, if your immune system's still low and you're still suffering with these kind of issues, you may get another different infection again. I can't promise that that's not going to happen, but at least you can clear the chronic infection that's been in there for a long time. Or it works well for acute ones as well, if you've got a cold or, you know, sinus infection or whatever. So that's really effective. Check out the video below where I talk about that one a little bit more and how to use it. What I like about it is that it will provide immediate relief, and then you use it a few times a day for 3 days, and then you're clear. So what I like about that is not a thing where you have to keep using it and keep using it and keep using it, like, you know, certain other medications that I mentioned near the beginning of the video, or in fact, like many herbal products and all the rest of it, it's not habit forming. You use it because you're killing the infection. If the infection is the only reason why you had a blocked sinus, then that's it, you're done. You are now good, which is awesome. If the other factors going on like these, then at least you have dealt with the infection issue, and you've also given your sinuses a good clear out, and reduced the inflammation, irritation, all the rest of it that comes from the infection. So it's always a good thing. Always a good thing to get chronic infections out of your body. And the challenge of the sinuses is that it's not easy for your immune system constituents to get there, because a lot of them are just like hollow cavities. So to be able to give your immune system a hand and give yourself a clear out, I really recommend it. So those last two are things that will help you immediately, that are fairly easy to do. This next one probably sounds like such a weird thing to say, but for many years it was actually the #1 piece of advice I gave to anyone with chronically blocked sinuses, and it's clear your intestines. Like the #1 thing you can do, in many cases at least, if you have this chronically blocked sinus, is to have a colonic or an enema. Now, if that is something that you have never done before, I understand it's a very intimidating thing that you may well have a lot of reservations about and not want to do, and I do understand that, of course. You know, I never would have even considered doing it if it weren't out of pure desperation, because I had a lot of different health challenges, so I understand. But if it is something that you've done before and you know that it's not such a big deal, or if you are at that point where you're just willing to try whatever it takes, this is a fantastic thing that immediately helps you breathe better. And whereas this technique with the breathing might help for a few hours, and this one might help for a few hours, this is one that can really help like for a day, several days, really as long as it takes until your intestines get blocked again. For the reason I said before, even with all the other factors going on, if you just unblock your intestines, and again, you're a colonic or an enema, even if they're done very well, do not unblock the whole intestine, I realize that, but even if they only unblock the large intestine by getting some of the waste and the gas out of there, then it means that there's more space, and then the small intestine can start dumping into the large intestine, and then the liver and the lymph can start dumping into the small intestine, and everything just starts to unblock when you undo the blockage at the bottom, let's just say. So that's a really powerful technique. It's the most effective thing I think that you can do if you had to only choose one of these. But of course I understand the reluctance, which is why it's recommendation number 3 in this video. So the next thing, and actually probably a thing that you may have even more resistance to than the idea of inserting some kind of tube inside you, is the idea of cutting out common intolerances or allergens, right? And so why would that be? Because let's talk about intolerances or allergens briefly. And I'm talking about the level of intolerances. I'm not talking about the kind of, or mild allergy. I'm not talking about the medical kind of level where you eat something and you have a really strong histamine reaction. Maybe you can't breathe, you can't see, like everything swells up. We're not talking about something as extreme as that here with this, or at least I'm not. I'm talking about the more mild version. And so what is an intolerance? In a nutshell, it's where your immune system treats something as if it were an enemy that it needs to attack. And there are various theories postulated as to why that happens. One theory is the idea of a leaky gut, but that's something that I know is not necessarily agreed with mainstream science. I'm not 100% sure if if that is a thing that is real or not, honestly. But what I do know is that when you have a highly blocked and therefore toxic and probably pathogenic intestinal tract, then some of the foods which have particular proteins specifically can be treated by your body as if they're invaders. I won't say any more than that. So as to why that happens, but that is what happens. That's the thing that matters. And so the difficult thing about these intolerances is often hard to be able to tell if it's an intolerance or not, right? It's very easy to think it's something else. Intolerant responses that I've had have ranged from having itchy, dry eyes, to having blocked sinuses, to having this feeling like I've eaten broken glass, to having lower back pain, to having itchiness in my ears, to feeling like almost like I'm going to fall asleep. And then different foods will create different reactions in me, right? And all of this stuff is way better since I started applying all the stuff that I teach. And now, in fact, I could have any of these things on this list and it'd be no big deal. But I don't usually. And the reason is because even though it's no big deal if I eat them once, if I eat them again and again and again, then those intolerance reactions do still start to come back again. And so I have it with the intolerances which are the most common, which I'm going to list for you now. With a lot of these things, they're not actually particularly good for you. Soy, despite what you may have heard, is bad for you in a lot of ways. It's bad for the thyroid. It's bad for, definitely for men in terms of it's high in a phytoestrogen. It's high in a plant version of a female hormone. There were loads of other, bad things about soy. I won't go into all, just Google it. But so soy is like a pretty toxic thing, as are most, if not all, of the things on this list. So these are things that are better off avoided anyway, honestly. And so you may get immediate benefit though, which I put it in the immediate, if you just cut all of these out, right? So I'm going to list them for you. So soy, gluten, What is soy, by the way? You can find soy in a lot of different forms. Sometimes they'll add soy protein to things. They add something called lecithin to things, which is an emulsifier, something that binds a liquid, like a water-based liquid to a fat. There's loads of different versions of soy in food. You may think you're not eating soy, but they put it in kind of a lot of processed and packaged food. So with all of these, you've got to watch out. Gluten, a lot of people don't understand what gluten is, I notice, even those on a gluten-free diet. Gluten is a type of protein that is in wheat, barley, and rye, okay? And also some of the more ancient grains like spelt and various other ones as well. Kamut, I think is another one. But it is, in terms of the things that people normally eat, it's in wheat, rye, barley. And often oats contain a little bit because of the way they're processed, but they don't actually have to. Oats, you can find oats that are completely gluten-free. So it's with all of these, it tends to be the protein that is the issue. Not always, but usually. So it's the protein of these particular grains that's the issue. Again, they put it in everything. If it says flour or anything like that on the packaging, then that means wheat flour, that means gluten. Dairy, like I mentioned earlier, #1 culprit if you have a blocked nose, especially if you have a runny nose that's creating a lot of mucus. Dairy is extremely mucus forming in most people. Some people can digest it a lot better than others, so I'm not saying it's universally bad, but it can be the cause of sinus issues a lot of the time. So that's the most obvious one that you want to try cutting out. Corn is one of the top 5 most common things that people are intolerant to. So for me, in the case of corn, if I have too much of it, no, I could have a plate full of Doritos or whatever, but I don't. But if I were, then to have it again and again and again, then it would start to create the effect that it does. In the case of corn, for me, it's like eating broken glass, very unpleasant. Sugar is something that you want to clear off for all kinds of reasons, but one of them is that your body reacts to them as if it's a invader, and can create an intolerant reaction. Egg is another one. Some people do great on eggs, but some people have an intolerance to it. So that's something you got to watch for. If you eat eggs, make sure they're good quality eggs, by the way, and that the chicken has not had like a horrific life. The yeast is another thing. And I mention this one because a lot of the time if people cut out gluten, they cut out gluten like breads, but they might have different gluten-free breads. And first of all, be aware a lot of gluten-free breads are made of corn. So if you have that issue, it's not going to be any better. But even if you have it as something else that's non-allergenic, like rice, like a rice bread, if it's made with yeast, yeast may well be the thing that bothers you. And generally it's referred to people with candida, which is another kind of a chronic infection. They'll react more to yeast, but that can bring that reaction as well. And then lastly, nuts. Okay, some people have severe allergies to nuts, like they'll make you die. But the more common thing again is that it's another thing that's an irritant. So what do you actually do with this list? I just said this is an immediate thing. Well, again, if you are desperate, if you are highly motivated to resolve this problem once and for all, stop eating those 8 things, right? And stop eating all of them if you don't have time to waste, just stop eating all of them. That's the simplest thing to do. If the idea of stopping even one of them is very difficult, let alone all of them, then what I would suggest is do one at a time, cut it out, don't have it for 3 weeks, because that's enough time for your body to kind of acclimatize and get used to not having it, and then have a lot of it at once, 2 or 3 times. Now, those instructions are specific. That's because sometimes, even if your body's highly intolerant to something, if you only have it once occasionally, it's not actually a big deal. So you want to have it several meals in a row to see if it has that reaction with you. And you want to have a lot as well, right? So when you cut all that, when you actually go for it, eat like, a slab of tofu or something for several meals. With the wheat, have like bread with every meal, pizza, pasta, or whatever, right? Dairy, have a nice big glass of milk with every meal, right? Like, have a lot is what I'm saying. And then, when you do that, pay attention. Do your sinuses get worse, right? You also want to pay attention to other stuff for the sake of your overall health, but as this video is about sinuses, pay attention to what happens to your sinuses when you reintroduce a large amount of food, several meals in a row of each of these type of foods after not having them at all for 3 weeks. And you may be very surprised what happens. I mean, I hope not. I hope you can eat all these things and feel fantastic. But if they are the thing that's ruining your ability to breathe, no matter what, or causing all this pain, this suffering, this irritation, this agitation, this panic, you know, some people wake up panicked because they can't breathe for their nose. So, you know, if you're motivated, that's another really great recommendation. Okay, and now let's get into permanent long-term solutions, because, you know, you may not want to be doing any of these things on an ongoing basis, right? As I said, I'm a bit of an extreme case because my health was so bad at such a young age compared to most people. That's why I still tend to avoid all those things, even though I could have any of them, you know, a couple of times without an issue. But I've seen many, many people who do these things that I'm about to recommend, and they can totally eat everything again. They're totally fine. They don't need to do intestine clearing by any manual method because their whole digestive system is working so well. They've got a strong liver that's producing enough bile. They've got good peristalsis in their intestines that keeps moving the waste through. They're in a position where they're breathing correctly, right? It's very difficult for them. Like, you have to really exert yourself before you start feeling out of breath. You know, and again, that's a sign of health. Just like a mouth breather is an insult. If you meet someone and like they start huffing and puffing just to get up out of their chair, do you think, oh, that person must be really healthy? No, right? And ditto, if you were like running with someone, you know, quickly and side by side with them, and you were like, like panting, like struggling to keep your breath, and they were just breathing normally, you'd think, wow, they're at a super level of health, right? So I just want to emphasize this part again when I talk about learn to breathe correctly. We're not, even though it is counterintuitive to what you feel like you want to do, it's not really counterintuitive compared to what we understand. We understand that breathing a lot, like if someone is sitting next to you and you can just hear them breathe, that's not a great indication that they have a high level of health, right? And if you're uncertain about this, then try it, right? Spend time with people who are very unhealthy, who are maybe even, you know, close to death, and you will see that they breathe very deeply and heavily. They overbreathe. And then spend time with people who are very fit, or spend time with people who are healthy young people, and you will notice that they do not breathe very hard, even if they are doing stuff, even if they're exerting themselves, right? So this is common sense. It just goes against what our intuition is to breathe in this way where we're not over breathing. And so the whole story about that and how to actually do it, again, link below this video to find out more about that. So the next one is you want to clear your intestines and liver. Now, I've put that as like an immediate thing in terms of you can just do, you know, a procedure which takes 30 to 60 minutes and you can have relief for a period of anything from days to weeks. So that's something. But to really resolve the situation long term is what you want to do. And so again, the detailed instructions about exactly how to do all of that, check out the video underneath. The next thing you want to do long term is really aim to leave it alone, meaning leave your nose, leave your sinuses alone. Stop blowing your nose, stop sticking your fingers in there, stop putting water up there, herbs, whatever, right? Salt, whatever it is that you do. Like, all of that stuff to some degree is irritating. Now, you know, I recommended one product which I said is really good to go in there and actually kill it. That's the only thing I'd recommend that you actually put up there. But long term, you would ideally not even do that. You would just leave it alone in there. Do these other things that I've recommended, and then don't irritate it manually, either by blowing your nose or by getting your fingers in there or putting anything up there. And that's important as well, because if you're in the habit of doing all that stuff, then you might be doing everything else right, but you keep irritating it. And where there is inflammation, irritation, there's going to be more mucus. And where there's more mucus, and so it's a vicious circle, right, that we want to avoid. And the last one is cold immersion. And I was considering making that actually an immediate step because in one way it can be, but it's quite a challenging thing to do. So I ended up, there was already a lot of stuff here that I think is probably fairly challenging to people. So I didn't want to push it any further. And plus, this is more a technique that sometimes it can provide instant relief, but it's more a thing that you want to be doing medium to long term. So why is this one so important? Because whether the issue is inflammation, whether the issue is excess histamine, one of the best things you can do for that is to do cold immersion, which is to cool yourself down. I call it cold immersion. Some people talk about cold showers, but I really think it's getting into a cold pool of water, whether it's the sea, whether it's a river, whether it's a pool, or whether it's just a bathtub, which is what I do 99% of the time. But getting into cold water and cooling down for a few minutes can provide immediate relief, but it's also fantastic. Best thing of all for reducing inflammation. And again, there's a link to a video that explains a lot more about that underneath here. One more bonus piece of advice I want to give you, which comes purely from personal experience, is to watch the humidity. So in my experience, generally, as the humidity of the room or the space that you're in goes down more and more, so in other words, as it gets drier and drier, the worse that your sinuses are going to get. The most extreme example of this that I think most normal humans are ever going to have to tolerate is being in an airplane. Being in a plane, the percentage humidity is anything from like 2% to 10%. I've personally taken a humidity stat on there before and seen it's been around 10%, slightly less, according to that device anyway. So that's extremely dry, and so that's why, like, after every flight, before I kind of applied this kind of stuff and largely dealt with this issue, I would like have tremendous sinus issues, because the flight completely dries that whole area out, and it just exacerbates and irritates all these other things that we've really talked about. So it's also, you know, being in a very dry environment also leads generally to your intestines being more blocked. It also leads to more stress. So it's important to be aware of that one. So if you can't avoid being in a dry environment, like for instance, because you have to be on a plane, then you are just aware of that and you make sure to keep yourself hydrated while you're on the actual plane. And then if you're not, if you're in another environment, like the most common source of the air being too dry that most people do to themselves without even realizing is air conditioning. I avoid air conditioning at all costs. It's not good for you, it's not good for the planet, like it's expensive, it's really not a good thing in any way. I realize that, you know, in some situations, in some environments, it can literally be a lifesaver, but what I'm saying is if you can possibly avoid it, then do, because again, it works by drying out the air considerably, and that's really going to make your sinuses worse in most cases. It's just going to exacerbate these kind of issues. So yeah, that's my bonus recommendation. Avoid dry air if the air is dry, like if you're in a desert environment, for instance, you can't help it. Humidifiers, I personally have never got on with them because I don't like the fact that they're constantly making noise. So I will like hang up like wet towels. That's one way of doing it. Another thing, like if the room that you're in, you know, let's say if you're in a hotel room or something because you're traveling again, happens to be adjacent to a bathroom, you can just leave the shower running for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, something like that. That's a little bit wasteful, but I found, you know, it creates loads of steam and it just humidifies the environment. And if you know, you don't have the windows open or whatever, then you can actually hold that humidity in for a long time. So, you know, those are just a few practical suggestions, but the basic idea being beware of the humidity, know that the drier it gets, the worse you're going to feel, and act accordingly. So thank you so much for watching. I hope it was, you know, informative, entertaining, maybe inspiring, but most of all, I hope that it encouraged you to take action, to try some of these things or as many others that are necessary to get the result you want, to be able to breathe clearly, right? So whatever your experience is, I would love it if you interacted, if you left a comment underneath, if you left any questions, if you want to share your experiences, if there's anything that you found that works well, or even better than any of this, then I'd love to hear about it. So please share. If you've had experience with any of these things and you want to share them, please do. I'd love to see that. Share it with anyone who you think would benefit. I would really appreciate that. And remember to, if you're watching this on YouTube, to subscribe and click the notification bell so you know when I've released a new video. And if you're on my website, even better, go ahead and subscribe there and make sure that we stay connected in a more permanent way that isn't based on the whims of social media. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. I really appreciate it, and I really hope this has been of value to you.